Welcome to the Chemical Sensitivity Podcast. It's a podcast that amplifies the voices of people with multiple chemical sensitivity, or MCS, and highlights emerging research about the illness. This episode features an in-depth conversation with a man with severe MCS. Together, we take a deep dive into how the illness impacted his marriage with his former wife, and how it ultimately contributed to the breakdown of their relationship. In order to keep the guests and his former wife's identities confidential, we don't mention their names, the places they lived, where they went to university, or where they worked, but they're from the US. Listeners with MCS will know the illness can add to the challenges of dating and relationships. So even though my guest talks about events that are specific to his former relationship, I think folks with MCS will be able to identify with a lot of what he shares. And for people without MCS who may be listening, hopefully my guest's experiences can help shed light on what it's like living with this illness. I'm grateful to my guest for being willing to speak so openly about such difficult experiences. I really appreciate his humility, open-heartedness, and how he doesn't ever seem to blame his former partner for how she navigated the relationship. I hope you enjoy the conversation. We release new episodes twice a month. The best way to never miss one is to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. So I just wanted to thank you for taking time to come on the podcast to talk with me and to share your experience with listeners. Feel free to let us know a little bit about you, where you're coming from.
So I grew up on the West Coast of the United States, very much ensconced in nature, pretty idyllic childhood, which was nice. In college, I studied psychology, and I really fell in love with that. And so I spent my 20s doing research and pursuing an advanced degree in that. So I ended up getting a PhD. I've had some health issues even apart from MCS. So when I was towards the end of my degree of my PhD, I got restless leg syndrome, which is also a condition that people question whether it's real or whether it's worth worrying about because the name sounds so innocuous. And then once we finally found out what I had, we had issues around the medications, the various cocktails of medications we tried really zonked me out. So I fought through and got my dissertation done despite all of that. And so I was with my partner at that point. And so I do want to emphasize, she stuck with me through some physical hardships. That automatically meant that I was less fun to be around. We couldn't necessarily go out late all the time because I had to stay up late, stretching and stuff for my restless leg syndrome. When we finished with that, we went off, moved over to the East Coast, and we spent some time there as she was building up her career. And then we moved back to be near home, back to the West Coast a couple years ago. And so that's kind of a quick trajectory of my life.
And then you got MCS. Maybe was there one moment when you thought to yourself, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. This might be really challenging. Was there something that gave you a clue to how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work?
So yeah, I knew I had MCS at that point. I was self-diagnosed at that point. And I was looking into all the things that we would need to do in order for me to be able to possibly function. And one of the things that came up was that gas stoves are a no-no for us because they just leak so much gas into our air. And my ex-wife just loves to cook. If she weren't doing her chosen profession, she would be a fantastic restaurateur and chef. Yeah, back when we were doing school in the Midwest, she'd even just throw these semi-professional dinner parties for our friends where everything was just knock your socks off good. And so I knew that she had a strong prejudice against electric stoves, which I get, they're harder to work with. You can be less precise. You can't eyeball the flame the same way. And so, yeah, when I read that, I was like, okay, yeah, this is taking away something that she really loves and that's really core to who she is. And so I think it was that where I realized okay, I can kind of see how this is going to play out. I don't want to really accept it in this moment, but it's really hard to see how I take things like this away from her and she still wants to have a life with me.
You and I spoke previously and you'd mentioned there was a discussion around furniture.
I mean, we had multiple discussions around furniture, unfortunately. The one I think you're thinking about is the couch, where we'd had this old leather IKEA couch. It was like a love seat that we'd had since we moved to the city on the East Coast 4 years prior. And it was just getting kind of uncomfortable. And also just like it looked kind of dingy compared to like the fact that we now had a nice house. And she was really just wanting to finally have all the nice things that I guess she'd been dreaming about all her life and that she
Right.
worked so hard in order to have the money to afford. She got it in her head that one thing that our house absolutely needed was to get rid of our old couch and get a fresh one. And so when she was talking to me about that, I said, oh, well, let's do our research and let's find a couch that I can actually tolerate because most of them will probably be really bad for me. And so she was okay with that. We went to mychemicalfreehouse.net, which is something that I use a lot in order to figure out materials that will work for me. And they had an article on couches. And so they recommended this one couch brand. So I showed her the pictures of all these couches, and she just thought none of them were attractive enough for the aesthetic she was going for, which was a little frustrating. And so we looked around, and eventually she found one brand attractive enough from her point of view. She still didn't think it was her ideal. So I told her leather was out because I'd had really bad reactions to leather before. And she really had wanted like a beautiful, rich leather couch. So she was already having to not have that. And so we found this other one. And we found in a nearby town that there's actually a showroom where they were selling them. So we went, we picked a floor model that looked nice. It was this enormous sectional that she thought would look good in our place. And in the end, it looked pretty good. And we actually got compliments on it sometimes. But it costs, even on sale, even with all these markdowns, it cost $7,000. And she had the money for it, technically, but she was still really upset about having to spend that much money. Whereas, like, if it weren't for me, she could have spent a lot less and gotten a much nicer couch. And so that was one of the things where I think she felt like, okay, I did my part. I tried. I bought you this expensive couch. And eventually we ended up getting an electric stove as well. And so just having this feeling like, okay, this doesn't seem like it's going to end. Like I make these accommodations that I don't want to do, and it
Right.
doesn't fix all your problems. And
Right.
so yeah.
And there was another piece of furniture, if I remember right.
So right when we moved to the place, before I even understood that I had MCS, I think when she was finally about to practice, she met up with one of her friend's fathers, who's a guy, some sort of chemist, but he makes a ton of money. But he said, oh, now that you have money, you know what you really need to spend it on is there's this one brand of recliner that's just the most comfortable recliner in the world. And so it's a couple $1,000s, so I wouldn't have suggested it until now, but now you can afford it, so you should get that. And so while we were driving from the place we've been renting to the place where we bought our new house, we happened across a store that actually like had these recliners in them, and we tested them out. We sat on them. That is, they were extremely comfortable. And she picked out like beautiful coloring and got this recliner shipped all the way from I think like Sweden or Norway for her. And it arrived, and I just like couldn't be in the same room with it. And so what she'd been planning to have just to be this great place where she could just sit and be comfortable and look outside our picture window out on the nature around where we were living. Instead, I insisted, you know, the only way we could keep it in the house is if we take the area that was our study and we just decide that that's going to be off limits to me. I won't go in there, but you can keep it there, but I can't tolerate having it in the same room as me. So I did what I could to make it work without her knowing about it because I know she would have been upset. If she was out, sometimes I'd put it outside in the sun because that could help off gas things. And I mean, I only did a handful of times. I wasn't going to like bleach it in the sun or anything like that. But I was hoping like, okay, maybe if it gets hot, like whatever it is that I'm reacting to will off gas and then maybe it'll be okay. But that never turned out to work. Yeah, it just smelled strongly of leather the whole time. And since then, I've also learned that leather, just the curing process, often has heavy metals and stuff that we can react to.
Right.
And then I decided, okay, I'm going to look for the same brand, but a used one on Craigslist. And I drove out, I dropped, I think, $200 on this recliner. I got it in. She immediately commented at how junky it looked because it was used. And in the end, I couldn't even tolerate it anyway, either just maybe that type of leather never gets good for me because of how it was processed, or maybe it was old enough that it had some mold in it. But yeah, I mean, I tried to give her the closest approximation, and she didn't seem to appreciate that much.
And if I recall, there was also a record player stand, something of that nature.
Yes. And that one, so it's really crazy with this disease. Like, oftentimes things that you think are going to be fine just end up not being. So she did what should have been like exactly the right thing to do. She looked on Amazon. She found a record player stand from Russia that was gorgeous, made out of walnut, which is usually a good one for MCS. She didn't know that. She just knew that it was wood, and that should surely be fine. So it was just wood and metal legs. And so you think, okay, wood and metal, that's fine. It was like $600 or $800. It arrived, and I couldn't tolerate being in the same room as that. And we tried shellacking it. No, scratch that. We didn't do that. She wouldn't allow me to. We tried that with another piece of furniture,
Yeah.
which unfortunately didn't work.
But I hear what you're saying. You're trying all kinds of creative things. You're
And like trying to adapt, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to adapt. And I also hear that you're being really clear on what your needs are too, right? But you're also trying to make it work. Did there come a point where the two of you, or you, or I don't know, her, just said, like, we can't do this anymore? Was there a breaking point, is what I'm trying to say?
Well, first of all, last summer, I proposed to her that why don't we just give me a 6-month period to try to do everything I can to get better. And if I can't, then we can reassess where we want our relationship to go, because she was clearly miserable. I was still fairly early in the course of the disease, and from what I'd heard, avoidance to maybe like reverse it or get much better if you caught it pretty early. So I consulted with a person I knew who was more knowledgeable about MCS than I was, and she suggested that there's a woman in New Mexico who has MCS, who actually had a house who she built for herself for MCS, and it has a little tiny house attached, and she was trying to rent that out. So why don't I try to stay with her? So I contacted her, and I decided, okay, I'm going to spend the next 6 months in New Mexico, and hopefully, giving my body and my brain a chance to just like not react for a while. Maybe I can come back and we can figure out some version of normalcy where we can be together again. So I went out there, and sadly, I didn't even do well in that house. And this woman said that was common, that like she often tries to rent out to people with MCS, which it's really frustrating because about half of them just won't do well at places she does well at. And like, even though it's an MCS safe house, it was concrete mostly and old. So when I was off leaving for that place, my then wife was just really broken up. She couldn't go into work for a couple of days because like she's just so sad. And I think at that moment in her mind, that was kind of like, okay, our relationship's over. And that was her time that she grieved our relationship. And so when I left and tried that out for about a week, and then it didn't work out, so I came back, like from that point on, the relationship kind of changed its tone, where basically she'd already grieved. She was already in the mindset, even though she wasn't willing to say it out loud. She was already in the mindset that like, our relationship has an expiration date and it's not much longer. I think that was when, at least psychologically for her, like our relationship was over. And then what ended up working for me is some months later, I managed to go off to Aruba, which actually I did do well in. And this whole time we were seeing a marriage counselor remotely, which we'd never needed before MCS, but this was basically a way to cope with that. And so we decided to keep doing our marriage counseling when we were apart. And when we spoke to the marriage counselor my first week in Aruba, my then wife said, basically, I've slept better now than I've slept in a year. She never had sleep problems, but this last year she's had to like take lots of melatonin and various things to get to sleep. That was the moment that she let me know, like, I can't go back to life like this. Like, I've been holding so much stress, and now that I feel like what it's like to not have it on my shoulders anymore, like I just don't want it.
So your ex-wife was very clear on, it was tough for her. She was experiencing a lot of, you called it stress and challenges, trying to adapt and deal. And I wonder though, like, what was it like for you in those moments when you were really trying to make it work with the furniture and you were trying not to upset her, but you have needs too, right? Because of your illness. How were you feeling in those moments when, because in a way, like when I listen to you, it almost sounds like the couch was more important than your health.
Yeah. So the way she put it to me, and I can kind of wrap my head around this, although still frustrating. She does work extremely hard, long hours. Her only relaxation is to come home and just like have a house where she feels comfortable. I'd stripped so many things out of our house. We couldn't have our shoe rack. We couldn't have that. At its worst point, so shortly before I left, we developed some mildew in the kitchen that was really messing with me. And she wasn't willing to spend the money on remediation. I think because after buying the couch, she just felt like it was good money after bad to try to help me. I make a lot less money than she does. I teach part-time at a college, and what she would say to me when I bring up like, oh, we really need to fix this, even if it's not for me, like, you shouldn't let mold just like fester behind your sink. You need to fix this. And she'd say, well, basically like, oh, well, it is mostly to help you. So like, if you can get the money, that's fine. So that was her mindset at that point. So I ended up just trying to create a barrier, which looked ugly, but I didn't have an alternative, where I basically like taped up trash bags between the kitchen and the living room, because that was my last safe space. I was reacting to something in our bedroom at that point, probably her nice nightstands and stuff, which were like all nicely lacquered or stained. So all I had was the living room, which connected to the kitchen. So I put up this barrier, and it just really got under her skin. Like this idea that she couldn't have a pretty house, where I guess having like a pretty neat house just was a necessity for her to feel relaxed. At that point, towards the end, like since I couldn't even be in our bedroom, I was just like sleeping on the couch that we bought and sequestered it off with those trash bags. And I wake up to this ripping sound after a few days. And apparently she just like got up in the morning and tore them all down, because she was just like so frustrated and disturbed by the fact that that place looked kind of junky.
When you look back on it, do you think that the MCS brought some deeper issues to the surface?
I think what it revealed about my relationship was that it wasn't a totally equal relationship. Or maybe we didn't approach love in exactly the same way. But like, yeah, we went off on these adventures together, like I said, to various foreign countries. And they were always the trips that she wanted to take, which I was happy with because she has good taste. So she wanted to go see these countries, and I'd be her companion while she did it. She had to go through all these hard years of school. I would, when I could, give her a house to stay in. Like I said, I bought that house back when we were in the Midwest, and didn't ask for rent or anything, obviously. It just seemed like, from the way she sees her life, or at least this is what I'm coming to, her take on our relationship was basically like she was off living her best life as best she could. And I was there to like accompany her and be her companion while she did the thing she wanted to do. And it didn't feel as much like she saw us as a single unit, where when I get sick, it's her problem too. So I think that's the difference. Like, I think the way I approach relationships, my mindset on that is basically like, I get not wanting to share this horrible life, because MCS really makes you have to live this ascetic life that's no fun. But for her to also just more or less kick me to the curb and just like not want to help feels more like she's doesn't have the same kind of care and connection to me as I thought we had all this time. And again, I don't want to make it sound like she's heartless. Like she stood with me and never raised an issue when I was unemployed for 2 years. She wasn't happy about it, but she didn't give me grief about it. When I said, no, I can't make it to that music show, it's too late, I have to stay home and stretch for my restless leg syndrome. Like, she was patient up to a point, and I don't want to be unfair to her. The MCS was just too much, I guess.
After having been through what you've been through, do you think it's possible to be in a long-term relationship as someone who has MCS with someone who doesn't?
So that's the hard thing. Like, it's hard to ask a person to join me in this. So what I always thought was like, oh, well, us folks with MCS should date each other because we're all going to avoid fragrances and stuff. I mentioned that to an older person with MCS in just like a little group chat. And she was like, oh, that's the worst idea. I often tend to be sensitive to different things. And so like the face cream, that's the one cream that works for you, will be like something that I can't stand, and that sort of thing. So there's that. Yeah. But to go back to your question about someone without MCS, it seems really hard. It's one of the reasons that I hoped that getting ill after I'd already dedicated a lot of my life to this relationship would mean that it would stick around. So right now I'm visiting my brother in the South, and it's like winter-ish time. And I'm actually not reacting here in his house at all. And it's not even like a specially built house. It just like has high ceilings and hardwood floors. And I guess it's new enough that there's no mold. And so, one thing that makes me think is that it might not be impossible, given my level of sensitivity, that if I just find the right place, both the right location and the right house, that another person could just like not wear perfume and do like a handful of things and actually make it work. So I guess that's where I'm hopeful. I also have some pretty extreme contingency plans if I can't find a place. Like, the two options that I'm playing around with is there's one person with MCS, actually the person who runs the mychemicalfreehouse.net. She's working with a Canadian company that builds basically prefab houses that are mostly metal, and they seem to be safe for, like, very safe for MCS. So one thing that might happen is I might buy a small plot of land and like erect this like tiny home that is safe for me. So that already seems like it'd be hard to date a person if it's like, oh, here's my 300 square foot house. It's basically just, metal slapped together. That just doesn't sound too appealing. I don't want to say worst case scenario because things can always get worse. But I'm thinking about getting a minivan, thinking that it might be a contingency plan, like no other place works, I can sleep in my car. And then that's very much bad for dating, unfortunately. Like, yeah. I'm 39 right now. I'll be 40 in a couple months. Who wants to date a 40-year-old guy living out of a van? So,
well, they're kind of having a moment, right? Van life.
That's true. If I want to, like, I know everybody keeps sprucing it up, talking about van life. That's trendy. So yeah, maybe I could make that work, but still, like, I feel like this disease has turned me much less appealing from like not making a ton of money, but respected college instructor to guy living out of a van, seeing if he can get part-time remote work.
Well, I really want to thank you for taking such a deep dive and being so generous with your time and sharing all that you've shared. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
I mean, I'm just feeling more hopeful now that I've discovered that there are houses that I can live in. And like, I was really not thinking that would necessarily be the case. I mean, mainly I'm just interested and a little excited about like where I might get to live next. So I might live in Utah, I might live in Vermont. Like I plan to take this summer to basically do cross-country road trips and just like sniff out where I feel well. And there are some areas that have communities of people with MCS around. And there's the one in Arizona that everybody knows about. But I have a friend with MCS in Vermont where she has a whole Facebook group of people in Vermont with who at least are fragrance-free. And so it makes me think, okay, well, even if I'm far-flung, maybe I'll find other people who are similar to me to have some semblance of community. So that could be interesting.
Thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing all that you've shared. And I wish you all the best.
It was really good talking to you.
That brings us to the end of this episode of the Chemical Sensitivity Podcast. Thank you to my guests for being willing to speak on the podcast and for being so open. The podcast is produced by me, Aaron Goodman, Danny Penaloza, and Emma Bolzner. Please subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts to never miss an episode. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other podcast host sites. It's a great way to help others find the podcast. And follow us on social media. Just search for the Chemical Sensitivity Podcast or Podcasting MCS. If there's someone you'd like to hear interviewed on the podcast, just let me know. Email me at info@chemicalsensitivitypodcast.org. I'll definitely respond. And thanks so much for listening.